Sibai, Namaskar, Namaskaram, Namaste to all our viewers today. We are thrilled to have each and every one of you join us, especially on a weekend. In case you're a first time viewer, or even if you have joined us on previous occasions, I would now like to take some time to introduce who we are. Justice Collective is a blogging platform for insights and opinions on a broad spectrum of issues under the theme of justice. The platform works as a point of confluence for thought leaders, practitioners, justice workers, and in fact, anyone who has a perspective or experience related to justice, or the lack of it in various aspects of society. Justice Collective serves as a prompt for dialogue, concerted and definitive action, coupled with hope that every effort, however small, triggers a quantum leap in the fight for justice. Humanity 2.0 is envisaged as an online event that spotlights authors, creative artists, thought leaders, and practitioners in one on one conversations, serving as a platform to explore and articulate issues and perspectives as change agents, and also to influence public discourse on protecting the poor from violence. Today, we have an eminent photojournalist with us. Saumya needs no introduction, but I would like to honor her by sharing a few words about her. Saumya Khandelwal is a contributing photojournalist with Time, National Geographic, and the New York Times. She's a recipient of Getty Images Instagram Grantee 2017 for her work Child Brides of Shravasti. Saumya's work focuses on gender and environmental issues. She has built a diverse body of work spanning photojournalism and documentary genres of photography over the past 7 years. And she has previously worked with Thomson Reuters and Hindustan Times. Saumya, we welcome you today, and I'm so glad that we get to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for this super generous introduction.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I don't think the words are enough because you're such an amazing person, and I have been looking forward for this conversation. And Saumya, from like our previous conversations about the work that you have done, or when I've read up articles just in preparation for today, when I think about you, the words that come to my mind are like trailblazers, breaking barriers, and we'll come to this shortly. But before we begin, as we begin, I just wanted to begin our conversation from the simple question of how did it all begin for you?
Zoe, I think in my case, it's mostly been a case of things started happening for me, and then I just believed in my gut feeling, and it turned out the thing for me to do. I was actually doing a bachelor's in business administration. I'm actually from Lucknow. I'm not currently. I'm based in Delhi, but I was in Lucknow doing my bachelor's in business administration, and I had friends in a journalism course who would do photography. So the photography teacher was nice enough. Trilochan sir was nice enough to let me hang out whenever everyone was shooting around the campus, and that's where my excitement of for photography was sort of taken to the next step, because I had someone who was telling me about uh, about what I could potentially do with photography. My third year, my parents gifted me a camera, and honestly, I did not know what I wanted to do after my graduation. I was thinking I'm going to drop a year, and my parents, who've confessed to knowing early on in my life that they're going to have a difficult time bringing me up because I was just the rebellious sort. So so when I told them that I wanted to do photography, I'm sure they wanted to tear their hair off, but they were like, all right, just do whatever you want, but don't drop a year. So they were extremely cooperative. I applied for colleges across India, and then I chose to go to Jamia because it was they have this 1 year photography course. And I think for me, most of the time, things I was there were these options in front of me, and I was going by my gut feeling, and I was doing what I wanted, what I thought would feel right. I did not have an idea of where I wanted to end up or how I wanted things to be. But whenever I had the options, I was just making the choices that I felt good about. And yeah, and I ended up doing photography, photojournalism full time.
Well, that's so interesting, Soumya. I mean, that's such a diverse step, all the way from bachelor's in business administration to photojournalism. And I'm so glad that your parents gifted you that camera and, that you stuck to your intuition. And, the next question really, just sort of stems from that, photojournalism and the fact that, which we can't ignore is that, you're a woman and you've traveled far. You've traveled to UP, you've traveled to different places in Delhi, you've traveled to COVID burial sites, basically, which we would consider are places which are not suitable for a woman. So in your line of work, how do you deal with the gender divide? Or let me put it this way, why do you think that there is a need for women in photojournalism or in photojournalism? Do you think that there is a need, and if so, why?
So if I understand right, you're asking me if there's need for women in photojournalism, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And why?
See, I think in general, the need of the time is in any industry to have diversity, right? So to begin with, we talk about diversity with respect to gender, and eventually, and right now we're talking about women, and no one's really talking about having transgenders as photojournalists, right? We also need to have people coming in from very diverse backgrounds in terms of castes, look, regionality, and experiences in life to be doing photojournalism, for the simple reason that whenever we're going out or reporting on stories, there's a certain perspective we have, and I'm sure that's true for law as well. uh, there's a certain perspective which we have which enriches the way we look at things. When we're reporting on stories, it's always interesting to not just look at stories from a very linear perspective, but have different ways of looking at it as well. And also, me being a woman, I would empathize more, and I would be able to report better on issues related to women, and which is why it's important to let, for example, in my case, let have women talk about women issues. We obviously need people talking about each other's issues as well, but I think I'm also exhausted with having men talk about women issues, when on a personal level I see that there's least bit of sensitivity that they have towards the opposite gender.
No, absolutely. I think, you pointed that out really nicely. And, just I wanted to take on from there. And, when you started photojournalism, did you have anybody like mansplaining you about, how cameras work and those kind of issues? Did you ever face any of that?
Zoe, unlike what we'd like to believe, and unlike what journalism presents itself to be, journalism is a very traditional industry, and it's a very traditional space. And I would like to talk about photojournalism specifically because when you're talking about journalism, you often miss out the photojournalism bit, which is even worse than the rest of the newsroom. Uh, I don't, I mean, there would be extremely few publications where there'd be more than one woman photographer in the team, right? So it's obviously a problem that we don't have enough women photographers in teams. And a lot of times, women photographers who they're on the field also decide to leave their jobs because the environments to work in are just so non-conducive for women. All the time. I mean, at the end of the day, photojournalism or journalism is a representation of our country, of the social situation of our country, right? And you have very much the similar problems in our field that you have in the industry widely. Obviously, mansplaining is, I mean, the least of my concern, when we're on the field. But it's just the fact of uh, how, for example, if I am working in a team, I become the representation of the entire gender when I'm a part of that team as the only woman photographer. And for example, if I do anything, it becomes a representation of what women would do generally, which is extremely problematic, right? I mean, there are like 10 men in the team, and if they do something, it's just a, like anyone can do it. But if a woman does it, it becomes a woman issue. So, when I was working with this particular publication, and I mean, most of the publications that we worked in would have this token one woman photographer in the team, and one moves out, the second one comes in, second one moves out, third comes in. So when the third one moved out, it became an issue, and the publication decided not to hire women photographers at all, because they said, they're just not suited for this job. What they did not understand was that the environment was so non-conducive for women to be in, that despite the fact that they wanted to do photography, and they're all doing other things, and they're in better places. Some of them are still doing photography, some of them have given it up. But at the end of the day, it just does not feel like it's worth the effort to be taking the misogyny, patriarchy every day, day in and day out, and having to justify yourself all the time. I've been lucky that I'm in a position where I'm able to freelance, and I'm able to say this and talk about this to you. But most of the women who are in the industry will not talk about this, because they have their jobs at stake, and they either too junior in the team to be talking about it, or they fear that if they do talk about it, they're going to have to face the repercussions.
Absolutely, Saumya. I think I totally agree with you on this. Sometimes I think it's not about profession also. Like, you mentioned that if it was a man, things would have looked very differently. Now, for instance, when I go to court and say we argue, right, and say, supposing I lose my temper, I lose my cool, or I get a little aggressive, or say even if I tell somebody this is exactly what I want, if I was a male, they would have been like, oh, you know what, she knows exactly what she wants, and she's a go-getter and things like that. But unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know, I'm a woman, and so therefore I become bossy. I become bossy, and I'm aggressive, and there's that then people start creating these single stories, which is so sad, unfortunately, because I think that women, we have a lot to offer out there. And just I just wish that our gender would not be a hindrance for us. And just talking about this, and just catching on from what you said something earlier about how to capture issues differently, I just want to shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, in your line of work, how do you capture the essence of issues differently in the media space?
Zoe, I think in the current media space, we're in a very, very problematic time. We're in a time where the media is quite polarized, where there's very little trust that people have in the media. And in a way, I do think there's a need for regularization in the media space, but I don't have an answer as to who should be doing it. The reason I say that there's a need for regularization is because there's a lot of bad journalism happening there, right? But also, either we self-regulate, right? Because we obviously don't want the government to be regulating. But broadly, because of the sort of bad journalism that's also happening there, I think people do have a sense of frustration with the media broadly. And uh, I'm of the strong opinion that, if you have to talk about issues, if you have to talk about stories, there has to be a way to make those stories and issues relatable to a common man, instead of just sensationalizing it or just putting a lot of facts out there. I think what we need is a need for a more nuanced conversation where we can put people at the center of issues. Every every decision, let's say, the government makes, or if any issue at any point of time, would have a lot of repercussions. Some of them would be good, some of them would be bad. At the end of the day, what's good for the society has to be measured, right? But I think the measuring tool, at the center of the measuring tool, should be the people who being affected by it, not the ideologies of individuals sitting in cities as much as the people who are at the center of the issue and who are being affected by it. Because, for example, it's very easy for us to say, sitting in cities, that, for example, a lot of times when you're talking about man-animal conflict and you're talking about what's the right of the villagers there, or animals should not be killed. I mean, we can be sitting here and we can say that animals should not be killed, but at the end of the day, it's those villagers and the communities living around that who've also coexisted with the same animals, who are also losing their lives to it, right? And which is why I think there's the need to have a more nuanced conversation, putting human life at the center of uh, the discussion.
Absolutely. And I think, you're very right. Like, humanity is so important, and we need to remember that. And, just picking up from what you spoke earlier, you spoke a lot about empathy. And even now, you're saying that we really need to have empathy. So, how do you capture this in your photographs? As in, how do you capture it, is my question.
I think in terms of empathy, I mean, I don't have a formula on how would I capture it or how would I represent it, but my effort always is to, like I said, bring the people at the center of it. Uh, for me, when I'm taking a photograph, photographs can be illustrative. They can communicate some information to you, but for me, they need to be way more layered and nuanced. I should be able to get a context of who the person is, what their lives are like through the photographs, right? Because I think it's as much the context that defines the person as the words the person is saying or the face the person has had, right? And and those are the things that I try to concentrate on. And I feel like I'm very lucky that ways. And partially, I'm sure it's partially true for the law profession as well. Everything that each one of us reads in the news every day, I get that one chance to go and see it for myself firsthand and report on it, right? I might have my own opinions, I might have my own biases, but for that time that I'm there, I believe it's really important that I keep those biases aside and look at the entire situation from a human point of view. Even if there's a culprit, I think it's important to understand what made that culprit, you know and that's the kind of lens I would like to have for my work.
That's very interesting, you say that, because sometimes I think there's a dichotomy there, as well as in who do you empathize with? Do you empathize with one particular side or not? And that kind of a thing. But it's really so true. There's this quote that says, there's your perspective, then there's the other person's perspective, and then in the middle is the truth. And it's so wonderful that, you're seeking out unbiasedly what is the truth and trying to share your story from that particular perspective. And
But
yeah.
even when I say that I try to do it from a human point of view, I can't say that I'm completely unbiased when I'm doing it, because I have the baggage of my own experiences when I'm approaching the
Yeah.
situation. But I think the only thing that I could perhaps do in that situation is that I could, for once, obviously I can't let go of my experiences, but I can at least try to open myself to the situation that's in front of me. That's the least bit that I can do if I have to be fair or neutral to what's happening in front of me.
Right. I think our experiences also definitely, they shape us, and they shape our tomorrows, the way we think, all of that. And some just in terms, because we're talking a little bit about photojournalism here. You've covered, like I mentioned before, you've traveled a lot. You've traveled far and wide. Do you have any pictures, any particular project that's close to your heart, which you would like to share with us today?
Sure, I can start sharing some work from this project that I'd been working on, and I worked on it for a few years. It's with child brides in this place in Uttar Pradesh called Shravasti.
Wow, interesting. Okay, I'd love to see them. And I'm sure our viewers here would love to see your pictures.
Shravasti is primarily a place where 1 in 4 girls gets married before 18 years of age. So, we're talking about a really high rate of child marriage, and we're talking about a region which performs particularly bad on all parameters. On the fertility rate is extremely high, very few children go on to live longer lives. And the way I got interested in the story was actually with a little piece of literature that I came across from an NGO. And this NGO claimed to have, was sharing all this statistics from Shravasti, which were really awful. But when I looked up on the internet, I realized that there was very little reporting that happened from this area, which is very interesting because if you're sitting in Delhi and if there's some issues, everything is always covered, right? You can add certain perspectives to it, but broadly people know about it. So I was very surprised about the statistics that I'd come across. So when I was visiting Lucknow, one of the times I decided to take a detour. I was working at Hindustan Times back then, and I took an off and I took a detour to Shravasti to look at what was happening, and all those statistics were indeed correct. So it was very surprising that uh, a place, when we talk about child marriage, we talk about places like Rajasthan, or we know it's really bad in West Bengal. But I wasn't expecting it to be so bad, so close home. And what started in 2014 went on for a couple of years. Whenever I could find time from work, I would go back to Shravasti and I would photograph there. And I primarily started meeting a lot of girls. Uh, I started talking to a lot of them to understand what their lives are like. Uh, for example, in this case, Nirma, who's a teenager and she's married, we know that. I mean, we see the sindoor on her forehead. She want, she's still studying. She's one of the few girls who's still studying after marriage, but she wanted to be a doctor. But she did not know that in order to be a doctor, you had to take science. So therefore, she'll probably uh, go forward and do something else. But there's also a lack of awareness and lack of counseling on how the students can go forward. Pooja is 14 years old and she's also married. What typically happens in this part of the country is that girls don't start living with their uh, husband's family right after marriage. So the girl gets married, and then there's a ceremony called Gona, after which the girl will go to her husband's house. So I was also interested in seeing that if it was still fair to call it child marriage if they weren't really living with the husband. Uh, but I realized, and I started having this conversation with a lot of girls, and most of them told me that once they were married, they were prohibited from going to school because it just did not look appropriate for the girls to be studying if they were married already. And uh, and so, what do they do if they're not going to the school? They come into this preschool of sorts for the married life. So, the girls are now taking care of all the household chores, and they're cooking meals, washing utensils, washing clothes, feeding the cattle, and they're at the top of everything. So obviously their childhood is taken away from them and they're made to live a life which makes them to grow up earlier than their age. Suman is 12 years old and she's already married. She comes from this village which is particularly backward. So in this village, every girl who has reached puberty would be married, and the land holdings in this village are really really small. So the people are just growing enough to feed their own mouths, and they're mostly laborers and they work in areas nearby. uh, at this point of time, Suman is in this um, forest near her village, and what she and some of the other girls who were there with her were doing was they were pulling off the branches from the trees, which then their families would sell in the market for a very nominal price. Um, This is Shakuntala and Vijay. Shakuntala's elder sister is married to Vijay's elder brother, and Vijay is visiting them after marriage, and they just taking a round of the village. Uh, for me, I like to also add a context of the places that they're living in. You know, what's the kind of dynamics between boys and girls in the places like that. And this is Aarti in the foreground. She's 14 and she's married to Vijay's elder brother. This is on the day of Aarti's wedding. This is the haldi ceremony, and Aarti is in the center. All her cousins and her relatives are applying haldi on her back and on her body. This is the wedding day for Aarti. Uh, so it was pretty interesting for me to see how the weddings were happening in the village, because for us in the cities it's such a grand affair, right? But for the village, they just put up a little canopy in the center of the house, which is where the fairas were supposed to happen, but the entire village is invited, right? And Aarti is just 14 here, but all her friends and all the village people are here. And she already has that sense of responsibility. You know, her relatives are sort of dressing her up and preparing her for her husband coming in. But she already has the sense of responsibility. So when I met her on that day, she was at the top of things, asking everyone if everything was okay, making sure everyone had enough to eat while they were waiting for the groom to arrive.
I mean, I think she's just a child, we'll think that. And then, but her childhood is just gone. I mean, it's a lost childhood. Just, hearing you say that, she's just saying, well, how are you doing? And all of that. I think her whole childhood's just um, gone. And, there's just one question that has actually come up from Sean Thomas. And he's saying this, it's taken about 2.5 years of photographing the child brides of Shravasti. So why did the photographer spend such a long time on a single project?
I think that's where you get the nuances of the place. You know, our journalism is really too fast these days, and it does not have the time to report in depth. It does not have the time and neither the funding to be reporting in depth on projects. The reason we need slower journalism broadly, and you as a photojournalist, I would get this sense all the time whenever I was doing stories for the publications I was working for. I would get the sense that there's so much more to report on this, but I'm just getting, let's say, 2 days or 3 days to do it, and that does not do justice to it. The
Right.
reason we need to do something like this, and you'll see as we progress, that Aarti, who I became close to over a period of time that I was photographing her, I was following her life after marriage and through the process of Ghana, right? And I think just following someone's life over years gives you a very different sense of the changes that happen in front, which let's say I would not be able to do justice to if I was just went there once and photographed her and I came back, which is why there's a need for me to follow her over the years and see how life has been for her.
Absolutely. I think, just one meeting isn't enough. Just taking a couple of pictures on a particular day, it doesn't. Once you get to know them, you get to know the stories behind them. There's a lot more unfolds. So many things just unfold. And it's so beautiful to see. Even as I'm seeing this pictures, my heart is just breaking.
Mm.
And Ansi here, she has, commented, she makes this observation and she says, human development is about putting people at the center, and you cannot balance development by unbalancing human lives. And I think, just your work and, these photographs and the ones that you're still going to show us, I think that really captures it. Like, I think it makes us think, how do we put people at the center when we're thinking of development?
Yeah. And also, I think there's also need to question development in the sense of, uh, is it okay to just go behind development in a blind way where we just prioritizing technology or prioritizing and justifying the cutting down of forests or the loss of human life in the process of development. And I don't think that's who we are as a people. We have been very rich in terms of our lives, in terms of our views, very tolerant in all these aspects, and it's a shame that we have a very unidimensional way of looking at things now.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think we need to break away from that dimension that we look at things. This is another picture from Arti's wedding.
Yeah, this is another picture from Arti's wedding, and she's waiting for the husband here. And before that, they're just doing some rituals with Arti before he arrives. Now, the interesting bit was that Arti's elder sister was married in the same family. You see her at the back. She's in the pink sari. So she is married in the same family. And okay, I'm not going to reveal it right now, but let me move ahead for further images.
Yeah.
So that's her sister, and she was married when she was also a child bride. And when I photographed her here, she was 22, and she already had 2 kids by this age.
Oh my.
So while I was photographing her, and usually when I'm photographing people, I also like to have conversations with them to understand better what they're experiencing and what their situation is. And I was having this conversation with Aarti through this, and I asked her, what does it feel like, you getting married? So what does it feel like? So she said, what is there to feel? It happens to everyone. So I don't really know what do I do about this. So it just made me realize that we have the privilege of birth. We're sitting in cities. Honestly, half of or more than half of what we are is, we have no credit for that, right? We
Right.
didn't have the privilege of birth. We had the privilege that our parents sent us to good schools, and therefore we could build up on all these lives. Because for these girls, it's just a few hundred kilometers from my hometown, and there's such a substantial difference in the life of a girl there and my life, right? So I think it just made me realize that for a lot of what we do in life has got nothing to do with us. It's got to do with a lot of things that are pre-decided for us.
Yeah. That question of how should I feel, and I don't feel anything. I think that's really something that's that stayed. I think it'll stay with me because I've worked with survivors of human trafficking, and a lot of times when they come out, it's very difficult for them to also accept help because society doesn't look at them as people who are clean anymore. They're so looked down. There's that single story that that they're unclean and all of that. And my heart just breaks when that comes out in the way that they talk, in the way that they don't want to move forward with their life. But slowly, of course, and you walk with them, and after a certain point of time, um, they evolve. They evolve, and it's such a beauty to see that. But yeah, and I'm so this, everybody goes to how do you feel. I think this has really touched my heart today, and I think I'm going to carry this. I think it's just going to be with me in terms of how we treat people, how we look at people differently, and when we think, or just even in terms of my conversations with people tomorrow, making them aware of situations. I think it's going to stay with me.
There was this one girl I was photographing, and her images are not among the images that I'm going to show you today, but her name was Savitri, and the first time I met her, she was the only girl among all the girls I met who was extremely chatty. So I thought I was there to ask them questions, but no, that wasn't acceptable to Savitri. So once I was done with my round of questions, she took me inside to her room, and then she started asking me lots of things about my life, and what I was doing and how much education I'd had, and etc. etc. She was this tomboyish girl, and so I asked Savitri what she wanted to be when she grew up. And usually, when I'd ask these questions, either the girls did not know what to say, or they would say a teacher or Anganwadi. But Savitri came up and said, I want to be a police officer. Okay. And that was very fascinating for me. Later, Savitri got married, and I could only meet her after her marriage. And I went to her village. And earlier, I'd seen Savitri in a suit. Now she's wearing a sari and all of that. But Savitri had gone quiet. I was trying to have a conversation with her, and she wasn't chatty at all. She'd gone quiet. I could see that, she was wearing a sari and she had done all of this makeup, which was completely different from what I remembered her. And I just realized that, when probably you burden with so much, and you're talking about setups where also, a daughter-in-law is looked at very differently, and she has entirely a different set of pressures, that so much of the childhood is lost just when that change of house happens, because obviously the mother-in-laws are super dominating and they want the girls to behave in a certain way because they're the daughter-in-laws. And I think that was a transformation that for me really struck me, because I just thought that I would experience Savitri very differently, but she changed in a matter of just a year.
Yeah, just the lost childhood. The voice, they rendered voiceless. I think after this, but yeah, it's interesting to hear these stories. Very extremely heartbreaking to hear these stories. And this is still Aarti on her wedding day?
This is still Aarti on her wedding day. And this is Rajkumar, who's her husband. So the interesting bit is that Aarti got married and she was forced to leave school because her father thought it wasn't appropriate to go to school. Rajkumar, on the other hand, was really fond of education, and he obviously went on to study further. He did his bachelor's, and he then started to teach in the same school where he learned himself from. And this is the little structure they had in the center of the house for the wedding celebrations. And and now some time has passed. Now is the time for Aarti to finally go to her husband's house for good, right? So when I was going to see Aarti this time, I don't know why, but I'd hoped that Aarti would have grown up by now, perhaps because in my mind, I was hoping that she's having a gona, so she's now a big girl and she needs to go there. But when I met her, I instantly had a little shock because I realized she's still the same child, and now she's going to her husband's house, and I did not know how would she be handling all the pressures of being there and just not having this life anymore. So when I was there, it's customary for the relatives to come in the house, and they start this theatrical crying, so whoever's hugging Aarti and Aarti herself, they would have this theatrical crying, and which would and you won't even understand it when it moved to real crying. In a sense, I think it was supposed to be a went out for them by doing that, the exhibit of tears. I think it was also supposed to be a vent for them to take it all out and move forward.
Interesting.
And this is Aarti going to her husband's house on the day of her gona. It was a very, like Aarti was a very strong girl that way. So she's in the vehicle and she's instructing the driver on where to go and what to do, what not to do. Everyone else is in a separate tractor, and they're somewhere, and I'm with Aarti here, and we lost. But Aarti is in charge of the situation. She knows what to do. She's just about 15 now, but she knows what to do and she's directing. There is that fear of the unknown. She's going to this place. But I was in awe of the control she had over herself and the situation.
Yeah, so much of strength, resilience,
Yeah.
we face, and this is all in their childhood, and they're just 15. We would expect, a 15, no one would expect a 15-year-old to be a bride who has had to face so much.
Oh,
And there's a lot more she's yet to face.
right. And I think that's the quality that, appeals the most to me. The fact that you can be vulnerable and you
Mhm.
can still have the strength to hold yourself. I think, and just the kind of resilience that women have, I think it's awe inspiring. The So many women I've met through all the work that I do, and every time I see that sort of a resilience, it's always a woman.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's this quality of gentleness, strength that's under control.
Yeah.
That yeah, it comes, and it's very nice once you can have, because immediately the minute you think of gentleness, everyone conflates it to tenderness, and they're two very different things. But you could be vulnerable, as you're saying, but also be very strong. There's this inner strength that comes from inside of you. It's strength that's completely under control.
Yeah. And also, not being afraid to be vulnerable and to express yourself. I think that is commendable.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It's very hard to be vulnerable because we immediately think of so many assumptions, or, we get scared that in our vulnerability, people will come and invade that space and hurt us or something. But there's so much of beauty, I think, with the right people. And if you trust people, I think there's a beauty that comes out of a vulnerability.
So I went to meet these two girls who had these tattoos in their arms, and the interesting bit about the tattoos is that if they don't have the tattoos in their arms, they won't be accepted into the husband's family. So it's almost like being stamped that they married. And the way their uncle said it was कि कोई इनके हाथ से पानी भी नहीं लेगा अगर इनके हाथ में ये गुदना नहीं होगा तो.
Oh my.
And here it's Aarti on the first day of her arrival to her husband's house when she's going to stay here for good. So there's the separate room which was like set up for Aarti, and I was the only woman with Aarti all through when she was going to her husband's house, because in this part of the country, women don't typically travel at night because it's not safe. So whenever, for example, even when Aarti's Barat came over, there were only men, and there was just one woman who was Rajkumar's sister, and she would come inside the house, and all the men would be at the tent outside. So likewise, when this was happening, there weren't any women with her, and I was the only woman there. And it was beautiful because we were sort of each other's anchors there. Like for Aarti, she drew strength from the fact that I was there, but also again the strength that Aarti always had. She was constantly checking on me. Do you need something? Let me ask them to get you something. Be comfortable. You know, she's in this new house where she has her own set of apprehensions. But I was just so glad that she still was in charge of the situation.
Yeah, I think she has so much of strength, and that's shown, and you're able to capture that, even in your pictures. I think it comes out because it's so, from the inside. I think it just shows what's on the outside, and I think it's just very, yeah, interesting hearing her story.
And the next day after her gona, she was up at 4 a.m. in the morning because the first meal has to be cooked by the new bride, and she's making the halwa for the day for the rest of the house. And for the next couple of months, every day she woke up at 4 a.m. because she had to do all the house chores.
Oh my goodness. And this is a 15-year-old child.
Yes.
That's
And soon, the girls themselves, who themselves children are pregnant. In this case, the lady is more than 20 years old, but she is also a mother of two and she is also a child bride. That's all the work that I wanted to share.
thanks so much, Saumya, for sharing these pictures. And I think it's so interesting. And you know, so just taking on from this, it's like a large body of your work, draws attention to gender-based issues. And is this a conscious decision? And if yes, is there a backstory to this, leading towards issues that are often hidden or made unseen?
Uh, I think it's just a general consciousness of, in fact, I didn't even know I was doing it till the time uh, I looked back on my work. So I was just going through my Insta feed, and because Instagram is a place where I end up posting often. And I realized at a point of time that there were mostly women in my photographs. And that's when I realized, whenever I'm going to a new place, it's so much easier for me to connect with women and talk to them and explore their stories that my lens had started focusing on women. And I think this is coming back to the question that you started in the beginning on why do we need more women in photojournalism? It's precisely because of this reason. Otherwise, all the stories that you see in the newspapers are mostly as a male protagonist or a man talking about his issues, right? Because the men who are reporting it have their comfort level there, right? And which is why there's a need for that diversity, because we tend to connect with people differently and we tend to address stories differently.
And just taking on from this, do you think that hierarchy in organizations impact the ability for women to speak up?
um, for sure. Hierarchy in any place affects how people below speak up, right? It's all okay to have women at the lower levels and when they're doing their jobs, but then why do we see so few women at the top, right? Everyone's happy to have women in newsrooms, but if women start to rise, they suddenly have a problem with that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's if a man tells you go do this, it's okay. But if a woman says, "Oh, look, she's so bossy," it comes across like that. And I totally understand what you mean over here, and that's it's interesting. You think of that too. Um, and we just talked a lot about we've covered like gender issues and things like that, and your work and all. And so you when you go, you travel, you photograph very difficult things, and your passion for work is also very evident. And when you come back, how do you process, or how do you take time to heal before you move on to your next assignment?
It's been it's been a learning on the job sort of a situation for me, because that I have been at a point of time where I have also had sleepless nights, and where I've also struggled to uh, move from one story of human tragedy to the other. I think it's extremely important for journalism students to be told, for people joining news organizations to be told that mental health issues will arise and they're absolutely normal and they need to be addressed like mature people. I have taken counseling myself, and it has helped me tremendously to address the issues. And but I also know that it has been possible because there have been women who because there have been more women on the field. I know for a matter of fact that alcoholism is a problem in journalism. I know for a matter of fact that a lot of, and especially for photojournalists, it tends to be a very macho profession, right? I think the presence of women in this situation just makes it a little okay to talk about mental health, or just say that I'm not okay and that I need to do something about it, instead of resorting to short term solutions to it.
I totally agree with, and I'm really glad you talked about mental health, because even in the legal profession as well, it's we face a lot of vicarious trauma, and there's so much of stress that I think we don't think or we don't talk enough about mental health. We also live in a country where, the minute we say, I want to get counseling, people immediately they make these assumptions about you, and these are not nice assumptions. And so I think it's very important. And I think seeking help is also very important, knowing when to seek help, and also, seeking the right kind of help is so important. And self-care is so important. I'm so glad, you touched on these issues. And just another question for you, just for our viewers, to know a little bit more about you is, who have been some of the people who have impacted you and your work the most, and how?
I think for my for me to be able to enjoy photography and to convey what I feel through photography, I owe it big time to my mentor, Mr. Amit Mehra, who whose approach of photography has been very easy and very uh, you know enjoyable. It makes photography a space for me to enjoy, and I think in my approach, he's a big influence. In terms of photographers, there are so many incredible photographers across the world whose works that I am constantly in awe of and I look up to and I really appreciate. Uh, but apart from that, I also I don't uh, have a lot of photographer friends per se. My friends are from different streams, and I like watching good films. I like watching, hearing good music. I think Iranian film is my favorite film space in general because I think I think we as a society resonate with their society. For a lot of Hollywood cinema that I watch, I can watch it and I can be intellectually stimulated or in some cases emotionally moved, and I can come back and I'm like, all right, that was great. But when I'm watching the Iranian cinema and the way they attempt cinema, I think it moves me in a way that stays with me, and and also because I think as a community and as a society, we very very similar in terms of our values, the way we see relationships, the way we are as a family, as a culture. So Iranian cinema is my all-time favorite. I love reading classics. It kind of slows me down, helps me. I think as a child, it would also help me process some of the experiences that I was myself going through and make sense of it and understand how to interpret things and how to respond to them. Yeah, broadly.
Thanks for sharing that. I think, movies, pictures, I think these are great influences. And I think good mentors are also very important to have in your life. Yesterday, one of my mentors, she emailed me and she wrote something which had a profound impact and which I'm still, thinking about. And it was such a good time because, she talked about, when you do your work, you should enjoy doing your work as opposed to having to do your work. There's that change in that attitude. And I think, with you, I think you really enjoy what you do. You're so passionate about it. And that's just, it's very captivating. And I love that. And I think with this, we come to a close, but I just have one more question before we ask our viewers if they have any questions. Is there a message that you want to communicate through the work that you do? What do you hope, that the world will see or hear or awaken to or actually do?
I'm not looking at conveying any message, but I do hope that that the work makes people empathize and feel for the people that I'm photographing. I think if uh, if even for a minute they can feel with any of the characters that I photograph or relate to them or empathize with them, I think that's the approach that we need to have to issues more than anything else.
Thanks so much, Saumya. Viewers, now's your chance. We're here in conversation, with Saumya Khandelwal. If you have any questions, please, please send in your questions to us. This is like an important opportunity, so please don't miss it. Just grab. You can type on the chat box, and we can address them. While we're waiting, Samya, can I just shoot? Do you have any questions? I've been asking you questions this whole time. Do you have questions for me?
Not really. I've just enjoyed having this conversation with you today.
Same. I totally enjoy this conversation. And, when we were talking about the gender divide, there was this quote that was running in my mind, and that said, the soul has no sex. And I really wish that, there'd be a day when we would stop looking at people's genders in a way that it hindrances them, to a world of like true equality. Yeah. In its entire sense. And that's just a thought that was just coming to my mind the whole time.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, if you're a woman, and I'm sure that's true for transgenders as well, that your sex never leaves you. Everything you do is, at no matter how much you do in life, your gender will never leave you. But I think about it, and I'm pretty sure that I would not have it any other way either. I think it's the best that I could have asked for.
Absolutely. And I think there's so much of joys behind it as well. There's so much of room. The sky's the limit. We can fly and we can soar so high. We have one question. It says, in our conversations earlier, you had mentioned the recent work that you are doing on the pandemic. What have been some of the images that left an impact on you?
I think the pandemic has been a very harrowing experience, and all through it, I also had stopped looking at a lot of images. There are certainly these images that were out there of the migration of the crematoriums. But to be honest, after a while, I just had this sense of exhaustion because our lives themselves were so miserable at that point of time. And in fact, to date, I can't go back to looking at my work from the pandemic because it's just a bad time that I want to leave behind. So I don't know if it's okay to say if there are any best images. I think there are only harrowing images from that time.
Right, absolutely. And I think, with pandemic, I think, something that the country has, something which has come very naturally to us is, social distancing. I mean, that's so ingrained in us. It was so easy for us to social distance, but actually, what we needed to do is physical distance but maintain that bonds of friendship. Or I think it just came so naturally to us. I think that is something that really surprised me. So that's just something. I think you're very right when you say it's a harrowing time.
You mentioned the last time you were speaking, you mentioned that how we as a society also tend to alienate people. And I thought, and it comes so naturally to us because, we tend to alienate so easily. And I thought about it, and I thought it was a very interesting comment because, like, for a lot of villages that also, I often travel to, you can see the layers of the society, the castes and the religion there, right? And the outside would be the lowest of the castes, right? And then you came in and you'll find the castes which are better off inside the village, and the others are all outside.
Yeah, that's so true. And we have another question from Shantanu Datta, and he asks, Henry Cartier-Bresson is one photographer whose works I constantly admire. Do you have a photographer who has been an inspiration to you?
I have a lot of photographers who've been inspiration. I think if we talk about Indian photographers, I have always been in awe of Raghuveer Singh's work, and the way he looked at India with the chaos, and he never tried to filter out the mess and the chaos in his frames. Um, my mentor Amit Mehra, I think his way of uh, looking at the world is very different in terms of the silent moments. Raghu Rai, who creates this larger than life picture of what India is. I think it's all fascinating. So among the Indian photographers, these are photographers that I really appreciate. Internationally, there are hordes of them. There's Nico Economopoulos, who still practices. He's pretty senior, but he has these beautiful, well framed, very true to the moment images that always stick to me. There's a point of time when I was very fascinated with the works of Alex Webb, and while I was in college, I would just like look at all his works every day. Trent Park, they're photographers that I was really fascinated with. Uh, yeah, so many more whose names do not come to me instantly, but uh, I think there's some brilliant work happening in photography right now. And earlier we would just be exposed to as much because our way of consuming photography was through uh, mediums like magazines and very exclusive forums. But now with Instagram, there's so much more photography out there, and
Absolutely.
I'm just so amazed at the brilliant work that happens every day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how the world has also become like a smaller space, through this virtual world. And our next question is from Arjun M. Surendran, and he would like to ask, how do you handle accesses or permission to your subject take photographer for project, especially for the child brides of Shravasti?
Access is different in different situations, but for example, in case of child brides, I was in touch with this NGO, and I would often go out with their field workers to villages, get myself introduced to communities. There were also these school teachers who were teaching in those villages, so I befriended them, and they introduced me to the community at large. And that's how I was able to have my first interaction. And then over a period of time, after repeated visits, people began to trust me, and they were okay, and they understood what I was trying to do.
Thanks so much, and for answering these questions. Any more questions? We're just gonna wait for maybe like about another 10 seconds or so. Okay, I have an interesting question for you, Saumya. What has been the most interesting question that has ever been asked to you? So it's a question and a question.
God, I don't know. I mean, I've been asked. I mean, I don't know, interesting, but for sure, there are these funny questions that I get asked all the time, and there's been a question about why my website is not political. Why my political opinions are not there on my website. Then there has been a question about why photojournalists photograph people in misery.
Yeah.
And broadly that, I think it's always fascinating that one question that a lot of young photographers who go into all these documentary schools end up asking about photojournalism. They feel like a part of photojournalism can be pretty unethical because you're photographing people in their misery, right? And they always struggle to justify it. Like people ask, why don't you help in a situation, or why don't you get moved by what's happening in front of me, and how can you photograph in situations like that? I feel like it's a little misplaced in the sense that uh, doctors are never asked why do they not start crying when they're treating a patient who's met with an accident, right? It's your job. You trained to hold yourself together in situations like these. so I think so much so that like when I was starting off and I'd be in situations, and we'd go to all these political rallies and protest and everything, and it would be extremely amusing for me. I would have the time of my life watching everything that was happening there, and I'd be like, wow, this is so cool. And whenever something funny was unfolding in front of me, my camera would be below here and I'd be like laughing off. And then I'd hear everyone's like tuck, 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 everyone's clicking. So I was like, oh, Soumya, you're supposed to click it and you're not supposed to laugh over it right now. So that's a training that happened over a period of time where I was able to like tell myself. And even now there are times when I forget to shoot and I have to tell myself, so I might get back to it. But the other side of it also is that I think as photographers, we see so much and a lot of time things that we ourselves cannot process, that camera becomes our way of dealing with things. There's so many times when uh, there's this one point of time when I was photographing a delivery, a natural birth in a government hospital, and that was my first time of viewing it. And there were these two reporters who were with me, and there was just one that suit that you wear, right, over your clothes when you have to go to the OT. And there was just one, so they decided, okay, Soumya, you have to photograph, you get to wear it. And I wore it, and I went inside, and I saw what was happening, and I turned around and I went outside again. And they were standing at the door. They're like, "What happened?" I'm like, "Nothing." And then I took a step inside, and I stood on the side. And then I gradually took one step at a time forward till I sort of got comfortable with seeing the entire process of delivering it, and then I could photograph it. So a lot of times, even in our personal lives, I know people. I was discussing it with. So Danish Siddiqui lost his life earlier this year, right?
Yes.
And so we were there when his burial was happening, and the prayers for him were happening before that. And all the photographers were shooting, right? Imagine having to photograph the death of your colleague, right? Your own boss.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And I was speaking with uh, a colleague who's from Afghanistan, and he said, the weirdest thing that I've seen is there was a Afghani photojournalist who lost his life, and all his colleagues were carrying his janaza on their shoulders, and one shoulder was a janaza, the other shoulder was a camera. So I think it's just for a lack of any went out to deal with it. When you don't know what to do, you just put the camera in front of your eyes.
Right. Thanks, Soumya. I think what you brought out was really important, and yeah, I never thought of it from that perspective, and now you've given me a whole different perspective. And thank you so much for patiently answering all my questions today.
And
And
it's my first time talking to a lawyer, and it's been so much fun.
I'm glad.
Look at how you would look at the works and perceive them. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much, Saumya, and thank you so much for your time today. I know that it's a busy season. I mean, it's just a busy time for you. You had a shoot yesterday, and things just come up, but still you were able to block this time. And so, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And I truly do wish that you will continue to go from strength to strength. And I would also like to thank the team behind the scenes. We don't thank you all enough. There's so much work that you guys do. There are faces behind the scenes, and thank you so much for those of you for the team who's working behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And to everyone who's watched today, thank you so much for your time. And it has been fun, it has been interesting, and we would not be here if it weren't for you, our viewers. So thank you for joining us today. Stay tuned in for more engaging, eye-opening, and interesting conversations by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can send in contributions for Justice Collective in several ways, either through articles or videos or poems or paintings or any medium of your choice. Till we see you again,